13 months ago, on a humid Miami night that dragged past midnight, a 19-year-old from the Philippines stood 2 points from pushing the match to a final set tiebreak against the fourth-ranked player on earth, and the stadium forgot to breathe. That teenager was Alex Eala. The woman across the net was Jessica Pegula. And the three-set war that followed, decided by the narrowest of margins, left a piece of unfinished business that has been quietly traveling with both players ever since, across continents and surfaces, into a week in Madrid that could force the rematch nobody expected and everybody wants. Let's rewind to the specifics of that night in Miami, because the details matter more than the scoreline. Pegula won 7-6, 5-7, 6-3. Clean enough on paper. But paper does not capture the fact that Eala, ranked 140th in the world and playing on a wild card, had dismantled Iga Swiatek in the quarterfinals, flattened Madison Keys in the third round, and knocked out Jelena Ostapenko before that. She arrived in the semifinal having done things that no Filipino tennis player had ever done, carrying a country's emotional weight on shoulders that had barely finished growing. Pegula herself, veteran of dozens of deep runs at this level, admitted afterward that Eala was a really good tennis player who goes for her shots, takes the ball early, competes really well. That kind of understatement from a top-5 player translates roughly to, "This kid scared me." And Eala did scare her. In the first set, the Filipino roared out to a 5-2 lead before the inexperience and the occasion began pressing on her serve. A double fault at 40-30 in the 8th game cracked the door open, and Pegula, who has built a career on surviving exactly these kinds of wobbles, shoved through it. The tiebreak went to the American 7-3. In the second set, Eala responded by breaking Pegula 3 times, holding her nerve to serve it out at 7-5. The decider, though, belonged to Pegula's deeper reservoir of composure. She broke for 5-3 and served it out while Eala limped toward the net with her left thigh and ankle wrapped in tape, smiling, blowing kisses to a crowd that had adopted her as its own. That smile mattered. It was not the smile of a player being polite in defeat. It was the smile of someone who had taken a core sample of what was possible and knew she would be back to drill deeper. Now consider what has happened to both women in the 12 months since. Eala's trajectory after Miami 2025 was a controlled detonation. She climbed steadily through the rankings, and by February 2026, after beating Jasmine Paolini 6-1, 7-6 in Dubai, and following it with a win over Serena Sursti to make the quarterfinals, she reached a career high of world number 31. From 140 to 31 in under a year. At Indian Wells in March, she received her first top 32 seeding at a WTA 1000 event and justified it immediately, beating Diana Yastremska in 3 tough sets before Coco Gauff retired trailing 6-2, 2-0 in their third-round encounter with a left arm injury. Eala then fell to Linda Noskova in the round of 16, a loss that fit a pattern. Czech opponents have been her kryptonite, and she carries an 0-12 career record against players from that country. At Miami 2026, she beat Laura Siegemund in 3 sets and dispatched Magda Linette 6-3, 7-6 before running into Karolina Muchova in the 4th round and suffering a 6-0, 6-2 demolition that was as comprehensive as any loss she has absorbed at this level. That result stung, but it also clarified something important about where Eala currently sits in the competitive hierarchy. She can beat anyone ranked outside the top 15 on any given day. Against the absolute best, she needs conditions, matchup, and momentum to converge. When one of those elements is missing, the gap becomes visible fast. Her clay court record tells a separate and more complicated story. Going into Madrid 2026, Eala's career numbers on dirt read 15 wins against 23 losses. That is not a misprint. She is, statistically, a losing player on clay. At the Linz Open in early April, she beat Julia Grabher before falling to Jelena Ostapenko 6-4, 7-5 in the second round. At Stuttgart, her first premier clay event of the year, she was bounced in the first round by Leylah Fernandez 1-6, 4-6 in a performance that offered very little evidence of improvement on the surface. She enters Madrid as the 29th seed, ranked 44th in the world, carrying a clay record in 2026 of 1 win and 2 losses. Those are not the numbers of a player you would pick to upset a top 5 opponent on this surface. And yet, Jessica Pegula's 2026 has been a campaign of quiet renovation. The American entered the season determined to address the most persistent criticism of her game, and the stats suggest she has done it. Her serve, long dismissed as a liability relative to her ranking, has undergone a visible transformation. According to Tennis Abstract, she now wins 63.2% of her serve points, up from 60.9% in 2025 and 59.9% in 2024. Her first serve points won percentage has climbed to 70.4, a career high. She credits a focus on spin and placement rather than raw pace, working with her coaching team to develop a delivery that starts more rallies on her terms without exposing her to the free errors that used to undercut her consistency. Madison Keys highlighted this improvement publicly in March, calling it the difference between Pegula being a persistent contender and Pegula being a genuine threat to win any tournament she enters. The results have followed the improvement. Pegula's 2026 match record stands at 24 wins against only 4 losses. She retained her Charleston title in early April, becoming the first player to win back-to-back titles at that event since Serena Williams in 2012 to 2013, dropping sets along the way but always finding a third-set gear when it mattered. In Charleston, she came from behind against Irina Camelia Begu, survived Elisabetta Cocciaretto 1-6, 6-1, 7-6 in a match that looked lost after the first set, gutted through Yulia Putintseva 4-6, 6-4, 7-5, and then defeated Iva Jovic 6-4, 5-7, 6-3 in the semifinals before crushing Yulia Starodatseva 6-2, 6-2 in the final. What stands out about that week is not the title itself, but the pattern. Pegula was repeatedly pushed into deep water and repeatedly found a way out. That is the resume of a player who trusts her own problem-solving under pressure, and it is a dangerous quality to carry into a WTA 1000 event. On clay specifically, Pegula is 5-0 in 2026 after Charleston. Her movement has always been underrated, her ability to slide into shots belying the fact that she built her game primarily on hard courts. She takes the ball early, she redirects pace efficiently, and she rarely gifts free points. The criticism of Pegula on clay has always been that her game lacks the heavy topspin needed to move elite opponents around on a slow, high-bouncing surface. There is truth to that. But Pegula has learned to compensate with court positioning and with a willingness to absorb pace and wait for shorter balls to attack. She is not Iga Swiatek on clay. She does not need to be. She is Jessica Pegula on clay, and in 2026, that has been enough to beat everyone she has faced on the dirt. So here is where we stand as Madrid begins. The draw has placed Eala against a qualifier in the first round, with 19th seed Elise Mertens likely waiting in the second round and a potential third-round encounter with 12th seed Ekaterina Alexandrova or former world number 1 Karolina Pliskova further ahead. Pegula, seeded 5th, received a first-round bye and sits in a different section of the draw. For these two to meet, they would need to navigate deep into the tournament, likely requiring Eala to reach at least the quarterfinals and Pegula to hold her seeded position. It is not the most probable outcome. But the architecture of the draw does not forbid it, and in a field this deep, the possibility alone carries weight. What makes a potential Eala-Pegula rematch on clay so fascinating is how the surface itself would redistribute the advantages and liabilities from their Miami encounter. In Miami, on hard court, Eala's game was at its most natural. She takes the ball early, drives through her ground strokes with a flat to mild topspin trajectory, and uses her exceptional return game to apply relentless pressure on the opponent's serve. Her return of serve is genuinely world-class, ranked among the best on tour in terms of the percentage of return points won against first serves. When she is locked in, she can make even accomplished servers feel like they are serving into a wall with angles. Against Pegula in Miami, she won 37.8% of first return points, which does not sound imposing until you realize she was doing it against a player whose first serve was landing at nearly 71%. Eala's Return was the engine of everything she did in that match. It kept her in the first set despite being outserved. It fueled her second set comeback. And even in the third set, where Pegula's experience ultimately prevailed, Eala's ability to get the ball back deep and with purpose forced the American to earn every point. On clay, that return game should theoretically travel well. The slower surface gives the returner a fraction more time to read the serve, set up, and direct the response. The ball sits up off the bounce slightly more than on hard court, which suits a player who excels at taking the ball at its peak and redirecting it. Eala's return game on clay should, in principle, be even more effective than on hard court. The problem is everything that happens after the return. Clay exposes Eala's serve more ruthlessly than any other surface. Her delivery lacks pace, it lacks the spin variety that keeps opponents guessing on dirt, and it does not generate the free points she needs to protect narrow leads. Among the top 60 players on tour, she ranked 56th in service games won percentage in 2025. That number has improved slightly in 2026, but not enough to neutralize the issue. On hard court, where the ball skids through and the server gets more free letters in the alphabet, Eala can survive a below-average serve because her return game and baseline play compensate. On clay, where every serve comes back, where the returner has time to set up and rip, a weak serve becomes a recurring invitation for trouble. And Pegula, who has spent 2026 becoming a better server, is precisely the kind of opponent who would exploit that invitation. The American's improved first serve would land with enough spin and depth to neutralize Eala's return advantage, while Pegula's own return game, always one of the steadiest on tour, would feast on Eala's second serve in the thin Madrid air. Madrid's altitude, 650 meters above sea level, does strange things to the physics of tennis. The ball moves faster through the thinner air, bounces higher off the clay, and carries more on flat shots than it would at lower elevation. For a player like Pegula, who has retooled her serve around spin, the altitude could add bite and kick to deliveries that might sit up at sea-level clay events. For Eala, whose serve is already her weakest shot, the altitude offers no compensating benefit because she does not generate the kind of topspin that profits from reduced air resistance. There is also the matter of what Madrid's unique conditions do to the balance of a baseline rally. Because the ball travels faster and bounces higher, rallies tend to be shorter than at Roland Garros or Rome. Points are more aggressive, more decided by the first few shots rather than by attrition. This is theoretically a point in Eala's favor. She prefers shorter rallies. She likes to take the ball early, redirect it, and end points before they settle into the kind of grinding, high topspin exchanges that favor players with more physicality. If she can get her return in play and attack Pegula's second serve, the altitude might actually help her create the kind of quick, decisive points she thrives on. But Pegula in 2026 is not the same opponent Eala faced 13 months ago. The serve improvement is the headline, but underneath it lies a subtler evolution. Pegula has become more willing to move forward, to take time away, to finish points at the net when the geometry allows it. In Charleston, she came forward more than 20 times per match in some rounds, converting at a rate that suggests genuine comfort rather than desperation. On clay at altitude, where approach shots can skid through and opponents have less time to pass, that forward pressure could strangle Eala's counterattacking game before it gets started. The psychological dimension of this matchup cuts in unexpected directions. Conventional wisdom says that the player who lost the close match last time carries motivation, and the one who won carries complacency. But that framework does not account for how much has changed in both women's standings. Eala is no longer the wild-card underdog. She is a seeded player at a premier event, expected to win early-round matches and accountable for her losses in a way she was not a year ago. Pegula, meanwhile, has shed the label of best player never to win a major that dogged her for years, replacing it with a 2026 narrative of technical renovation and competitive resurgence that has genuine momentum. Neither woman would enter this potential rematch carrying the same emotional baggage she carried the last time. There is something else worth noting, something the stats do not capture and the previews rarely discuss. Eala's Linz loss to Ostapenko and her Stuttgart loss to Fernandez both followed a specific pattern. In both matches, she was competitive in the early stages, matching her opponent's level through the middle of the first set, before a sequence of tight service games went against her and the deficit compounded. She did not collapse. She did not play badly. She simply ran into the wall that every player with a below-average serve encounters on clay. The margin for error on service games is so thin that 2 or 3 points going the wrong way can cost you the set, and once behind on clay, the task of breaking back against a player who is now serving with confidence and hitting heavier becomes exponentially harder. Against Pegula, that pattern would be lethal. Pegula does not give back breaks casually. She is one of the most disciplined frontrunners on tour, and if she were to break Eala's serve early in a set, the door for recovery would narrow rapidly. Eala would need to find a way to hold serve more consistently than she has on clay all season, and she would need to do it against a player whose return game ranks among the top 10 on tour. And yet there is a scenario in which it works. Madrid's altitude, the ball flying faster, Eala striking flat and early with that gorgeous timing, the serve carrying just enough extra pace from the thinner air to buy her a few more free points, the return game neutralizing Pegula's improved delivery. A close first set going Eala's way to inject doubt into Pegula's movement patterns, and then the crowd, the electric Spanish crowd that has watched Eala play here 4 times before and has seen her grow from a qualifying round hopeful into a main draw contender, carrying her through the moments where her body and her serve would otherwise fail her. That scenario is not likely. It is, on the current evidence, probably not even the second or third most probable outcome of a potential meeting between these two players in Madrid. But it is possible, and the reason it is possible is the same reason Eala beat Swiatek in Miami, the same reason she beat Paolini in Dubai, the same reason she took Pegula to 3 sets the last time they played, Alexandra Eala's ceiling. On the days when her return game is operational and her court craft is dialed in, and the moment does not overwhelm her, is higher than her ranking and her record suggest. It is a ceiling that exists in a different zip code from her floor, which is part of what makes her maddening and magnetic in equal measure. Pegula knows this. She said as much after Miami. She knows that Eala is not a player you can take lightly, regardless of surface, regardless of seeding, regardless of any data point you might cite to prove that the matchup favors the American. Because the data does favor the American. On clay, the data overwhelmingly favors the American. Pegula is 5-0 on the surface in 2026 and Eala is 1-2. Pegula is ranked 5th in the world and Eala 44th. Pegula just won a clay court title and Eala just lost in the first round of a clay court event. By any rational metric, this should not be close. But rational metrics are what Eala has been defying since she walked onto a court in Miami as the 140th ranked player in the world and left it as a semi-finalist who had beaten 3 Grand Slam champions in a single fortnight. Rational metrics are what she defied when she stunned Paolini 6-1 in the first set in Dubai, when she had golf on the ropes at Indian Wells before the injury retirement. The question has never been whether Eala can produce individual performances that transcend her ranking. She can. She has. She will again. The question has always been whether she can do it on the surface that punishes her weaknesses most severely, against an opponent who has specifically improved in the areas that matter most against her, in a best-of-3 format, where there is no room to recover from a slow start. Madrid will not necessarily answer that question this week. The draw may keep them apart. Early round losses may intervene. The qualifier Eala faces in the first round could be dangerous, and Mertens in the second round already beat her once in straight sets. The road to any hypothetical meeting with Pegula is itself a gauntlet that Eala's clay court game has given no assurance she can survive. But if the road opens, if the matches fall, if the altitude and the moment and the memory of a midnight semifinal in Miami all converge in the same stadium at the same hour, then what you will see is not a mismatch. What you will see is a 20-year-old whose best tennis is elite enough to trouble anyone alive, served inside a game that is still figuring out how to exist on the surface beneath her feet. Across the net from a 32-year-old who has spent the last year quietly rebuilding herself into the most complete version of her career. You will see a return artist against an improved server, a risk-taker against a problem-solver, a player whose entire career has been defined by moments that arrive before she is supposed to be ready for them against a player whose career has been defined by the patience to wait until she is. And you will see, for the second time, the collision between those two philosophies that made their Miami semifinal one of the most compelling matches of the 2025 season. The last time it happened, Pegula survived. Barely. At midnight. With Eala limping. On hard court. Where the Filipina was supposed to be dangerous. Madrid is clay. Eala is not supposed to be dangerous here. And that, if you have been paying attention to anything this young woman has done over the past 13 months, is precisely the kind of sentence that tends to age very badly.